You are already behind. Most people reading these words right now will die without ever knowing why, and the reason has nothing to do with talent, timing, or luck. There's a reason this keeps happening to you. A reason the money never stays. A reason the ambition burns, but the results never arrive. A reason you have stood at the threshold of a better life so many times and pulled back at the last moment. And that reason is not what you think it is. It is not the economy. It is not your upbringing. It is not the cruelty of circumstance or the selfishness of those who arrived before you. No, no, no. The reason is something far more intimate, far more treacherous, and far more correctable than any of those comfortable excuses. It lives inside you. It breathes inside you. It runs, silently and without mercy, every single hour of every single day, shaping what you believe you deserve, dictating what you dare to reach for, and quietly, systematically, destroying the future that was always meant to be yours. This is not a metaphor. This is not poetry. This is the most precise and clinical truth that Napoleon Hill spent more than 20 years of his life researching, interviewing, and documenting. A truth confirmed by the wealthiest minds in the history of American commerce, from Andrew Carnegie to Henry Ford to Thomas Edison. Men who built empires not because the world handed them opportunity, but because they learned with absolute discipline and terrifying commitment how to make their minds obey them. And you're going to learn that today, not tomorrow, not when conditions improve today. Picture a man and call him by whatever name feels familiar, because you may know him, you may be him. You may have seen him in the mirror on a Tuesday in October, when the bank balance said one thing and the bills said another. He wakes up at 6 in the morning. He is tired before the day begins. He drinks his coffee standing up because sitting down feels like a luxury he has not earned. He drives to work in a car that costs him more in anxiety than it ever will in monthly payments. He spends 8 hours, sometimes 10, sometimes 12, building something that belongs to someone else, executing a vision that is not his own, expanding a fortune that will never carry his name. He comes home. He is too exhausted to dream. He watches something on a screen to quiet the noise in his head. He sleeps, he wakes, he repeats, cada dia, sin excepción. And the tragedy, the unspeakable tragedy that Napoleon Hill identified as the single greatest crime a human being can commit against their own soul, is not that this man suffers. It is that he has accepted the suffering as normal. He has built walls inside his own mind, thick, reinforced walls with no windows and no doors, and he calls those walls realism. He calls them practicality. He calls them being responsible. But they are not walls of wisdom. They are walls of fear. And behind every one of those walls, there is a room he has never entered. A room where his real life is waiting, fully furnished, fully lit, with his name on the door and abundance stacked to the ceiling as Kusha. If what you just heard sounded familiar, if that man resembles someone you know or someone you see every morning, then what you're about to discover in this narration is not optional for you. It is urgent. It is the difference between a life that was lived and a life that was merely endured. And before we go further, understand this. The principles you are about to encounter have been sitting in the world for nearly a century. They are not new. They are not trendy. They are not the invention of some motivational personality who discovered self-help between podcasts. These principles were forged in the furnace of real industrial history, tested by men and women who had nothing, who lost everything, who rebuilt from rubble, and who died with more wealth, more influence, and more legacy than entire dynasties. The architecture of their success was mental before it was material. The foundation was laid in thought before a single brick was placed in the physical world. If you find value in what this channel brings you, if the ideas here have ever made you sit up straighter, think bigger, or breathe differently, then this is the moment to become part of this community. Leave a comment below right now, just one word. The one word that describes what you most want to build with your life. Wealth, legacy, freedom, discipline. Whatever it is, write it, because naming it publicly is the first act of the mind taking command. And subscribe, not as a passive gesture, but as a declaration that you have decided to invest in your own mental architecture, that you are choosing, deliberately and without apology, to build something that matters. Now, let us talk about what is really happening to you. There is a room in the house of your mind that you have never visited. Call it the engine room. Call it the basement of your belief system. Napoleon Hill called it the subconscious mind, and he described it with a reverence that bordered on the sacred because he understood, after interviewing more than 500 of the most successful individuals in the world, that this room is not passive. It is not a storage closet. It is not a library where old memories collect dust. It is an active, living, breathing manufacturing plant that produces your reality 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, whether you give it instructions or not. Here's what that means. If you do not consciously, deliberately, and repeatedly feed that room with specific instructions, it will run on whatever programming was installed during your childhood. Your early failures, your moments of humiliation, the voice of every person who ever told you that you were too much or not enough. See, that is what is running your life right now if you have not intervened. Not your dreams, not your ambitions, not the vision you carry quietly in the back of your mind. The old programming, the inherited fear, the ancestral poverty consciousness that was handed down like a piece of furniture. Nobody wanted, but nobody knew how to throw away. And here is where the tragedy deepens into something that should shake you to your foundations. Because it is not just your life on the line. Think about the children in your house, or the children you plan to have, or the ones who call you by a name that means family. They are watching. Not occasionally. Not when you think they are paying attention. Always. Children do not learn what parents teach. They learn what parents are. They absorb the architecture of your inner world through every conversation you have about money. Every tightening of the jaw when a bill arrives. Every defeated silence after another month that ended with less than it began with. They are building their own mental house right now, and they are using your blueprints. What blueprints are you giving them? Napoleon Hill wrote with devastating clarity about a man he called the average person. A person who by the age of 60 has spent 40 years working for someone else's dream, has accumulated just enough to survive, but never enough to be free, and carries to the grave a full cargo of unused potential and unanswered questions. He called this the most common and the most tragic form of failure in human civilization. Not bankruptcy, not spectacular collapse. Quiet, comfortable, daily surrender. And the cost of that surrender is not paid only by the one who surrenders. Consider a woman and anchor this in a very specific moment. A Wednesday evening in late November, just after dinner, when the table has been cleared and the children have gone to bed, and the house is quiet in that particular way that lets the truth in. She looks at her partner and she sees someone who once had fire, who once spoke about the future with a light in their eyes that made her believe in things she could not yet see. And now, sitting across from her in the dim kitchen light, is someone who has slowly, almost imperceptibly, over the course of years of small surrenders and unchallenged fears, become a stranger to their own ambition. She does not say it. Maybe she never says it. But the distance between what was possible and what is actual fills the room like a wall between them. A wall built one day of inaction at a time, one excuse at a time. 1 year of waiting for the right moment that never came. This is the cost. Not just dollars, not just missed investments. The cost is intimacy. The cost is vitality. The cost is the slow erosion of the person you were meant to become, and the silent grief of everyone who loved that person and watched them disappear into comfort and fear. Atiende, you need to hear this because it is the hardest truth in this entire narration, and Napoleon Hill did not shy away from hard truths. He said, with the authority of a man who had looked poverty in the face and looked wealth in the face, and measured them both with scientific precision, every person who fails financially fails first in their mind. The outer world is always a reflection of the inner architecture, always punto. And if that is true, and it is, then the question is not whether you can afford to change. The question is whether you can afford not to. Because here's what happens if you do not. Here's the trajectory that plays out with the merciless predictability of physics when a mind is left on its default settings. The weeks become months. The months become years. The years compound, not like interest in a well-managed account, but like debt in a neglected one. The gap between where you are and where you dreamed of being does not stay the same. It grows. It grows because the world does not wait, because opportunity does not pause out of respect for your hesitation. Because every day that passes without a deliberate mental intervention is a day that the old program runs unchallenged and produces more of exactly what it has always produced. And then one day, and this day arrives for every person who has not taken command of their mind, you will look back, not forward, back. And the view from that vantage point is the most terrifying landscape a human being can face. Because it is not made of monsters or catastrophes. It is made of ordinary days. Days that looked harmless, days that felt like they could be recovered tomorrow, days that you traded for comfort, for distraction, for the temporary relief of not having to confront the gap between your reality and your potential. And those days are gone. They cannot be reclaimed. They cannot be renegotiated. They are the currency you spent. And you will know, with a clarity that comes too late for most, exactly what you bought with them. Napoleon Hill called this dying with your music still inside you. and he considered it a form of theft. A theft committed against the world, against your family, against the future generations who would have built upon your foundation had you dared to lay one. Do not let that be your story. Now here's where the architecture begins to change, because here's the other truth, the one that lives on the opposite side of the fear, the one that every great industrialist, every self-made magnate, every person who built something extraordinary out of nothing understood in their bones. The mind that can be programmed for poverty can be reprogrammed for prosperity. The walls that fear built can be demolished by decision. The rooms that have been locked can be opened, and the engine room, that subconscious manufacturing plant running day and night in the basement of your being, can be given new instructions, precise instructions, and it will follow them with the same faithfulness and the same power with which it has always followed the old ones. This is not wishful thinking. This is not the language of hope. This is the language of mechanism, of principle, of law. Napoleon Hill spent a lifetime documenting the law of the mind, and what he found was not mysterious. It was architectural. The mind responds to what is repeatedly placed inside. Feed it fear, and it manufactures more fear. Feed it limitation, and it will find limitation in every direction. But feed it deliberately, consistently, with burning clarity and emotional intensity, the image of what you intend to build, and it will begin with the same faithfulness and the same relentless productivity to manufacture the conditions, the ideas, the connections, and the actions that lead to that image becoming real. Escucha. This is the first principle, and it is the cornerstone of the entire edifice of success that Napoleon Hill built across decades of research. Everything begins with desire, not wishing, not hoping, not casually preferring one outcome over another. Desire. Burning, specific, relentless, almost unreasonable desire. The kind that does not permit negotiation. The kind that does not accept a reasonable substitute. The kind that Carnegie had when he decided, without a single dollar to his name, that he would become the most powerful steel manufacturer in the world. The kind that Edison had when he failed more than 10,000 times in his pursuit of the incandescent light and refused to call those failures anything other than 10,000 ways that had been eliminated from the list of wrong answers. That quality of desire is not a personality trait. It is a skill. It is a practice. And it begins with a single, specific act, defining your chief aim. Napoleon Hill was absolutely uncompromising on this point. He said that the single most common characteristic of every failed life he ever studied was the absence of a definiteness of purpose, not laziness, not stupidity, not bad luck. The absence of a specific, written, emotionally charged declaration of what the person intended to achieve, by what date, and what they were prepared to give in exchange for it. The mind, he argued, cannot move toward a target it cannot see. It cannot manufacture resources for a destination it has not been given. A mind without a chief aim is like a building without a foundation, and no matter how beautiful the architecture above ground, it will collapse. So here is the first concrete action, the first brick in the new structure you're about to build. Write it down today, not in your head, not in the abstract language of someday and somehow. Write in specific terms, the exact financial condition you intend to achieve. Name the number, name the date. Name what you will give in return, whether that is service, innovation, discipline, or sacrifice. And then read that statement aloud, twice a day, every day, with the full emotional force of someone who already knows it is done. CC, twice a day, every day. Because the subconscious mind does not respond to logic. It responds to repetition and emotion. It responds to the instruction that arrives most often and with the greatest feeling. And when that instruction becomes the dominant signal in the engine room, the machinery begins to shift. This is autosuggestion, and it is not mysticism. It is engineering. Napoleon Hill described autosuggestion as the agency of communication between the conscious and subconscious mind, the medium through which new programming is installed. Every thought you repeat becomes a belief. Every belief becomes a behavior. Every behavior becomes a result. The chain is unbroken and it runs in both directions, which means that if you change the thought with enough repetition and enough emotional intensity, you change the belief, and the belief changes the behavior, and the behavior changes the result. The people who are living the life you want are not living it because they were born with different raw material. They are living it because, somewhere along the way, either by deliberate practice or by fortunate environment, the thoughts in their engine room were aligned with abundance, and they repeated those thoughts, consciously or unconsciously, until the machinery produced the corresponding reality. You can do this deliberately. You can do this starting now. punto. But there is a second principle, and it is one that most people overlook, even those who have read Hill's work, because it requires a surrender of ego that the average person finds deeply uncomfortable. No great fortune was ever built alone. Carnegie understood this, he said, and Hill recorded it faithfully, that he would rather have the coordinated effort of 100 ordinary minds than the solitary genius of one exceptional one. Not because individual brilliance is worthless, but because the mind in isolation has a ceiling that the mind in alliance does not. When two minds come together in perfect harmony around a shared purpose, something happens that Hill described with near-reverent precision. A third mind emerges. Not the mind of person A and not the mind of person B, but something new, something that did not exist before the alliance was formed. A creative intelligence that operates at a frequency neither participant could have reached alone. He called it the mastermind, and he was absolutely clear. Every person of great achievement in the history of recorded commerce had one. Every single one. Ford had it, Edison had it, Rockefeller had it. The form was different, the individuals were different, but the principle was identical. A deliberate, harmonious alliance of minds directed toward a single purpose, meeting regularly, operating in a spirit not of competition, but of mutual elevation. Look at the people closest to you right now. Look at the 5 individuals with whom you spend the most time, with whom you discuss your ideas, your fears, your ambitions. Are they building something? Are they expanding? Are they operating at the level you intend to reach? Or are they comfortable in the same rooms you're trying to leave? Because Napoleon Hill was not gentle about this. He said the environment of the mind is shaped by the minds it associates with, and that a person cannot rise permanently above the average of the 5 closest influences in their life. This is not a condemnation of anyone. It is an architectural reality. A building cannot stand higher than its load-bearing walls allow. If the walls of your mental environment are built from the conversations, the beliefs, and the expectations of people who have accepted limitation, then limitation is what your structure will support. Find your mastermind. Seek it with the same urgency and the same intentionality with which you would seek a business partner or an investor. Because that is precisely what it is. It is an investment in the architecture of your mental environment, and the returns, Hill documented this across hundreds of cases, are not incremental. They are exponential. Now here is a moment to pause and consider a story, and anchor it in a very specific time. A Thursday afternoon in early March, the 3rd week after a man named Richard had decided, for the 4th time in as many years, to postpone the business he had been planning since his late 20s. Richard was not unintelligent. No, he was by many measures one of the sharpest minds in his professional circle. He could see opportunities others missed. He could diagnose problems in a business model the way a surgeon diagnoses pathology, with speed, precision, and confidence. But Richard had a room in his house that he kept locked, a room he had built in his mid-20s after his first business attempt collapsed, after the investors pulled out, after the partnership dissolved in recrimination and loss. He had locked that room and papered over the door with the wallpaper of practicality. He told himself he was being responsible. He told himself the timing was wrong. He told himself he was protecting his family. But the family watched him. His son, who was 11 that Thursday in early March, watched his father sit at the kitchen table with a legal pad full of ideas and then fold the legal pad and put it in the drawer. The son watched this with the silent, absolute attention of a child who is absorbing a blueprint. And the blueprint said, "Desire is dangerous. Ambition leads to pain. The drawer is safer than the world." Richard died at 63. Not in poverty, but in something worse than poverty. In proximity, he was close enough to his dream to see it. Close enough to describe it in detail at dinner parties. Close enough to know, in the final months when the body began to fail and the nights became long and honest, exactly what it had cost him to keep that room locked. Not just the wealth, not just the business, the version of himself that would have existed if he had opened the door. His son is 34 now. He keeps his own legal pad in a drawer. This is the inheritance of fear. This is the generational architecture that Napoleon Hill warned about with a gravity that should stop every person in this audience cold. C. The poverty of the parent does not end with the parent. It is transmitted, not through genes, but through example, through the architecture of the home, through what is spoken and what is not spoken, through the rooms that are kept locked and the dreams that are kept folded in drawers. You have the power to break this chain. Not tomorrow. Now, punto. And here is the 3rd principle, the one that Napoleon Hill described as the great equalizer. The force that, when properly understood and consciously applied, transforms the most ordinary person into an instrument of extraordinary achievement, faith. Not religious faith, though Hill respected that dimension. Applied faith, operational faith, faith as a mental attitude, as a deliberate act of the will, as the decision to act in accordance with a belief before the evidence for that belief has arrived. He called it the head chemist of the mind because he observed, in case after case, that the moment a person began to operate from faith rather than from fear, the chemistry of their thinking changed, the quality of their decisions changed, the nature of the opportunities they attracted changed, and the speed of their results changed. Because here's what fear does to the architecture of the mind. Fear closes doors. Fear seals rooms. Fear reinforces the walls and lowers the ceilings and makes the whole structure smaller and smaller and smaller until the person inside it can barely move. And the tragedy is that the person inside the fear-built structure often cannot see how small it has become because they have been inside it so long that the walls have come to feel like the natural boundary of the world. Faith does the opposite. Faith opens the architecture. Faith says, I will move toward the vision before the vision has proven itself possible, because the act of moving is what makes it possible. Faith is not passive. It is not the posture of someone waiting to be convinced. It is the posture of someone who has already decided and is now simply executing the decision with every tool available. And the tools are many. The fourth principle is specialized knowledge, and here Napoleon Hill made a distinction that most people miss entirely. A distinction that separates those who accumulate and those who simply collect. He said that general knowledge, no matter how vast, is of limited value in the accumulation of wealth. What matters is specialized knowledge. Knowledge applied to a specific definite purpose. Knowledge directed by a definite plan. Knowledge organized and put to use. This is why the most educated person in a room is not always the wealthiest. Education without application, without direction, without the engine of a definite chief aim to give it purpose, is just furniture in an empty house. Beautiful, perhaps impressive, certainly, but inert. The wealthiest men Hill studied were not always the most formally educated. Ford never completed a formal education by conventional standards. Carnegie was a self-made intellectual. What they possessed was not breadth of knowledge but depth of application. They knew exactly what they needed to know to build what they intended to build. They acquired that knowledge through every available means, and they applied it with the precision of an architect who has memorized every measurement and tolerates no deviation from the plan. You do not need to know everything. You need to know what is necessary in sufficient depth to execute your chief aim. And here is the key. You do not need to possess all of that knowledge yourself. This is what the Mastermind Alliance is for. You build a circle of minds that together contain everything the mission requires. Your job is to be the architect, the one who holds the vision with absolute clarity and assembles the right minds around it. Escucha. Here's the question that should be running through your mind right now, the one that the loop of this entire narration has been circling since the very first sentence. Why does this keep happening? Why does the ambition exist, but the result not arrive? Why do so many intelligent, hardworking, genuinely motivated people spend decades in the same rooms, looking at the same walls, reaching for the same doors that never seem to open? And the answer, the real answer, is this: because the mind has not been made to obey. Not disciplined, not educated, not motivated. Obedient. There is a difference between a motivated mind and an obedient mind. And it is the difference between a building that looks impressive and a building that stands. A motivated mind feels good in the morning. An obedient mind performs in the afternoon when the feeling is gone. A motivated mind makes declarations. An obedient mind keeps them. A motivated mind begins. An obedient mind finishes. The process of making the mind obey begins with what Hill called the habit of definiteness. Definiteness of purpose. Definiteness of decision. Definiteness of plan. The mind, left to its own devices, defaults to vagueness, because vagueness requires no commitment, and commitment is uncomfortable for the part of the mind that is ruled by fear. The mind that has not been trained to obey will always find a reason to wait, a reason to reconsider, a reason to take one more day to think about it, and one more day, and one more day, cada dia sin excepción, until the days are gone and the thinking is all that remains. The obedient mind makes a decision and then marshals every resource available to execute that decision without entertaining the possibility of retreat. Not because it is reckless, not because it ignores evidence, but because it understands that decisiveness is itself a form of creative force, that the moment you commit fully and irrevocably, the universe of available resources reorganizes itself around your commitment in ways that were not available when you were still negotiating with your own hesitation. Carnegie demonstrated this. He made decisions with a speed that terrified his competitors and inspired his allies. Not because he was impulsive, but because his chief aim was so clearly defined, so thoroughly internalized, that every decision was simply a matter of alignment with the aim. When the aim is clear, decision is not difficult. It is automatic. Now, here is what you must do. Not as a general suggestion, not as a vague inspiration, but as a specific architectural instruction for the construction of a new mental building. First, write your chief aim today, not a general wish, a specific, quantified, dated declaration of intent. Write it in the present tense, as though it is already accomplished. Write it with the emotional force of someone who has already received what they are claiming. Read it aloud twice daily, in the morning before the world fills your mind with its noise, and at night before sleep, when the door between the conscious and the subconscious stands most open. Second, audit your mental environment. Identify the 5 minds closest to yours. Assess them honestly. Are they expanding or contracting? Are they building or merely surviving? And then, with the same deliberateness with which you would restructure a failing business, begin to restructure the alliance. Seek minds that are operating at the level you intend to reach. Invest in those relationships with the seriousness of a capital investment, because that is precisely what they are. Third, begin immediately to practice the discipline of controlled attention. Napoleon Hill was unambiguous. The mind moves in the direction of its dominant thought. Whatever you focus on with sustained, emotionally charged attention becomes the blueprint that the subconscious executes. This means that every hour you spend in focused, specific contemplation of your chief aim is an hour of active construction. And every hour spent in the passive consumption of fear, distraction, and the narratives of limitation is an hour of demolition. Choose construction. C. Every single day, choose construction. Fourth, embrace the principle of going the extra mile. Not as a moral virtue, though it is that as a strategic mechanism. Hill documented, in case after case, that the person who consistently delivers more than what is expected creates a surplus of goodwill, a surplus of reputation, and a surplus of opportunity that compounds over time with the same mathematical certainty as interest. The person who does only what is required receives only what is required. The person who does more than is required receives more than they could have planned for. This is not philosophy, it is arithmetic. Fifth, and perhaps most critically, master the emotion of faith by acting from it before you feel it. This is the discipline that separates the architects from the dreamers. The dreamer waits to feel confident before they act. The architect acts from a decision, not a feeling, and discovers that the feeling of faith arrives in the wake of the action, not before it. Faith is not the cause of the first step. Faith is what the first step produces. And then the second step produces more. And the third step produces more still, until the feeling of faith is no longer something you have to manufacture, but something you carry, like the memory of having built something before, the knowledge, bone deep and unshakable, that you have made your mind obey and the mind has delivered. Now here's a moment of reckoning, and it must be faced directly and without flinching. The mediocre life is not a neutral outcome. It is not simply the absence of success. It is an active cost, paid every day, compounded over years, extracted from every dimension of your existence. From your health, your relationships, your sense of self, your legacy, your children's blueprints, and your own private experience of being alive. Napoleon Hill said something that, when it lands properly, changes a person's relationship with urgency forever. He said that the most dangerous place to live is inside the average, because the average is comfortable enough to prevent the pain that would drive you to change, but not fulfilling enough to give you a life worth having. It is the zone of just enough. Just enough income to pay the bills, but not enough to breathe freely. Just enough security to stay, but not enough joy to thrive. Just enough comfort to anesthetize the ambition, but not enough happiness to justify the anesthesia. This is the most insidious architecture in the world. Not the slum, not the gutter, the middle, the comfortable, carpeted, climate-controlled middle, where the walls are painted in neutral colors, and the furniture is acceptable, and the view from the window is of other people's acceptable furniture and neutral walls. And nobody asks too many questions about what is behind the locked doors, because everybody has locked doors and it is rude to mention them. No, no, no. That is not a life. That is a waiting room, and the only question is what you're waiting for. The time is not coming later. The time is now. The urgency is real. The clock that is running is not the clock on the wall. It is the clock inside you, the one that measures not seconds, but possibilities. Not hours, but decisions. Not years. But the widening or narrowing of your own potential with every choice you make and every choice you refuse to make. Fishate. Every year that passes without a deliberate intervention in your mental architecture is a year in which the walls of limitation grow thicker, the ceilings grow lower, the doors grow harder to open. Not because the world becomes less generous, but because the habit of not trying becomes more deeply installed, more automatic, more invisible, until it no longer feels like a habit at all. It feels like reality. It feels like who you are. And that is the moment, that is the precise moment that Napoleon Hill identified as the point of no return for most people. The moment when the limitation stops being something they are experiencing and becomes something they are. Do not reach that moment, please. Not for your own sake only, for the children watching your blueprint. For the partner who chose you believing in the version of you that had not yet been defeated by your own hesitation. For the generations who will build on the foundation you lay, or fail to lay, with the same faithfulness and the same mathematical certainty with which every generation before them has built on the one that preceded it. You're not just building a bank account, you're building a lineage. You're building a set of beliefs that will be inherited. You're building the rooms that your children will live in, the ceilings they will accept, the doors they will dare to open or choose to keep locked. This is the weight of your decision. This is the true magnitude of what it means to take command of your mind. Bueno, let us close the architecture of this narration with the most important room in the building. It is not the room of money. It is not the room of strategy or tactics or techniques. It is the room that Napoleon Hill returned to in every chapter of every book he ever wrote, the room that sits at the very center of the structure, the one from which every other room is accessible, the one whose condition determines the condition of everything else. It is the room of self-belief, not arrogance, not delusion, not the performative confidence of someone who has decided to fake it. Real, earned, constructed self-belief, the kind that comes from making a decision and keeping it, from setting a standard and holding it, from beginning, however modestly, to demonstrate to your own mind that you are capable of commanding it, and it is capable of delivering. Hill was explicit. You cannot attract what you do not believe you're worthy of. The subconscious mind will not produce a reality that its programming says belongs to someone else. If the engine room is running on a belief that wealth is for other people, that success is for those with advantages you do not have, that the life you want exists on the other side of a wall too thick to break, then no amount of strategy, no amount of hard work, no amount of tactical intelligence will carry you past that wall. Because the wall is not out there. It is in here, and the only tool that dissolves it is the repeated, emotionally charged, uncompromising installation of a new belief. A belief that says, I am the architect, I'm the builder. I am the one who decides what this structure becomes, and I have decided. See, that is the declaration. That is the foundation stone. Lay it today. Read your chief aim aloud and feel it. Not as a wish, but as a claim. Build your mastermind and protect it. Audit your mental diet with the same rigor with which you would audit your financial accounts. Practice going the extra mile every single day, in every interaction, in every deliverable, in every commitment you make. And above all, act from faith before the evidence arrives, because the evidence follows the action, not the other way around. This is the science of success. This is the architecture of a life that is not endured but built. This is what Napoleon Hill spent a lifetime documenting, because he knew, with the certainty of a man who had seen it happen too many times to doubt it, that the difference between the person who dies with their music inside them and the person who fills the world with their music is not talent, not timing, not circumstance. It is the decision to make the mind obey. Make it atiende. Make it today. Make it with everything you have. Make it knowing that every day you choose to act from that decision is a day the architecture gets stronger, the rooms get larger, the doors get easier to open, and the life that was always meant to be yours gets closer, 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 until one morning you wake up and realize that you're not approaching it anymore. You're living in it. Punto, that is the answer to the question this narration opened with. That is the reason this keeps happening to you, and now you know what it is, and now you know what to do with that knowledge. The mystery was never outside of you. It was always inside, waiting in a locked room for someone with enough courage to open the door. You have the key. You have always had the key. The only question that remains is whether you will use it.